This episode of the Jiu-Jitsu Times podcast is brought to you in part by No Judges Needed BJJ Apparel and Lavender Lane CBD products. You can use the promo code JJT for 20% off your first order at No Judges Needed, and the code JJTimes20, all uppercase. Last two items are numerical for 20% off your first order of CBD products. Thank you very much for sticking with us. Enjoy the show. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Jiu-Jitsu Times podcast. I am your host, Kevin Bradley, joined as always by my co-host, Mr. Kevin Gallagher, and a very energetic guest. I'm going to introduce him in just a second. Today, we welcome fifth degree BJJ black belt under Higan Machado, a member of the Dirty Dozen, the first practitioners outside of Brazil to achieve the rank of black belt, and on top of also being a former Marine, an accomplished artist, most recently published in the public domain magazine by Artitude, Chris Haueter. Chris, welcome to the show, my friend. Thank you so much for coming by. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm wolfing down a tuna fish sandwich, hopefully mercury-free, but I love tuna. I'm almost done eating. I'm good. I'm just hanging out at home in these COVID-19 days.
We're good, man. We're you can eat your sandwich. You can do whatever you want, brother. You've earned the right to eat a sandwich on our meager podcast while we interview you, brother. You can do whatever you want to do, man.
Cool.
I'm super excited to talk to you, by the way, man. This is actually kind of cool. You're one of my heroes, man. I just think you're such an awesome dude, man.
Oh man. Okay. Well, I hope I don't fuck up then.
I know, right? Exactly.
Well, as is tradition here, we've been sort of starting off every episode with a new guest, just checking in to see how they're doing with COVID. This being such a turbulent time for the world, but jiu-jitsu in particular, we aren't allowed to meet and congregate and train.
Well, here's how we do. We homeschool. We try to keep the kids active and energetic. That's my wife, Melissa, back there. My son, Andy.
CombatBase.com.
Oh, and she'll make sure that we advertise our recently launched CombatBase.com, which I always forget. I'm one of those guys that always forgets to plug myself, as they say.
Well, that's what a wife is for. They're there to keep you in line and make sure that you pay the bill. So
She keeps me in line. Let me tell you, and gets my butt on the mat.
Your wife is also a black belt, correct?
Mm-hmm.
That's impressive.
A very technical black belt and younger than me, and makes me appreciate that I still have some man strength.
That's great.
He likes to beat me.
Wow! Breaking news: Chris Haueter,
wow.
Domestic abuse.
I think we got enough now, Chris. Thanks. We don't really need any more. That's all the headlines we need. That clip will get us 1 million views.
Domestic abuse victim.
Oh man,
Domestic abuse victim.
Chris, I just want you listen, as someone who is also, I am currently engaged to a very strong-willed person. There are resources for battered men. Okay. We can go to I can show you where the shelters are. You don't need to live in fear. Okay.
Oh, right. At the cut shelter. I'm kidding.
So let's talk a little bit here. Let's get to the nuts and bolts of things, man. First of all, tell us a little bit about yourself, when you started training jiu-jitsu and the reasons why and where, and just let's talk about who Chris Haueter is in a nutshell. Give us your 5-10 minutes on that.
All right. So in a nutshell, and luckily I have been able to put this in a nutshell because I've been asked this enough times where I kind of know how to condense a 4-hour story into 3 minutes.
I'm sure you've got this down to a science by this point. Exactly.
And my wife says, I don't believe you. But the shortest version is I am a lifelong obsessed with martial arts enthusiast who was lucky to discover Gracie Jiu-Jitsu before UFC 1. And one cannot emphasize enough the luck of that. Not that had I not saw UFC 1, I would have sought it out like other reality-based martial artists, but I was in the right place at the right time. And so briefly, as a child, like a lot of kids, I was obsessed with martial arts. I grew up watching, kung fu movies on the weekend, poorly dubbed. I loved the Chuck Norris movies, the Bruce Lee movies, and I grew up practicing Shotokan karate. I'm one of those kids who, when I was 21, still looked like he was 15 and had a huge ego and a stutter, which meant I got picked on and I did not want to take any shit. And I got in a lot of schoolyard altercations, and in spite of my childhood karate and kung fu classes, the fights would quickly devolve into a clinch and a ground brawling match. And again, this is all schoolyard stuff, right? So through experience, I had already known the progression of the natural course of what happens when two males begin a duel. I knew the nature of dueling, and I knew the posturing that happens, and I knew fake bravado from real bravado, and so I feel lucky enough through childhood experiences that I already kind of knew what happens when males engage in fights, and both the mental part, the physical part, and the primal evolutionary part. So
you're coming up on 3 minutes, by the way. Just
3:27, 28.
Just because I don't know if your wife is keeping a time on you.
Let's cram this 3-minute story into 3 hours. No, high school wrestling happens. I love it. And I knew before MMA when wrestling's just a sport. I always knew wrestling is a martial art / a combat sport, as is boxing, Muay Thai, Judo, Taekwondo, and sport, Jiu-Jitsu. And so, in short, I ended up in the Do world via Dan Inosanto, which is, I would say, the earliest mixed martial arts. Truly trying to mix Muay Thai, boxing, a bunch of the Asian arts and all this stuff. And I had one pro Muay Thai fight in which I won, but it hurt really bad, and decided that I'm going to return to wrestling. Went over to my local junior college to join the wrestling team. Went in the room and saw guys wearing what looked like thin karate gis and Aikido suits grappling. And it was the Aikido club. And I knew the instructor, and I remember asking him, I was like, wow, I didn't realize Aikido had a whole grappling aspect. And he goes, well, this isn't Aikido. It's Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And if you're interested, here's the guy's number, because really I'm not allowed to instruct. I'm only a student too. So he hooked me up Horion's number. I instantly went home and called, because we didn't have mobile phones. But then you went home, you grabbed the phone. Lucky if you had the push button. No, I'm kidding. It had the push buttons, and and I called, and Horion answered, and within 3 days, I was introduced to Horion's garage at a time where it was Horion, Hoyce, Hickson, and Hegan Machado, who was then called Hegan Gracie. And that's my origin story.
That's interesting. First of all, I doubt that Kevin is aware that there was such a thing as a rotary phone, so we can just say that at first. I think
I'm not
the one with the little
young.
thing that spun around, right?
I was around, guys. Well,
my grandmom had one of those in the basement.
All right. Well, I'm not going to let you just take me out to pasture right here. I would love to get some clarification on something,
Okay.
Mr. Haueter. I know you spent some time in the Marine Corps.
Yes.
Thank you for your service. What was I know now their combatives program incorporates a lot more of the ground. What was what sort of combatives were you learning back in the day, in the 70s, or was it the?
Oh, wow, boy, you're putting me old. No, it was 1983.
It was in the 80s, right? You learned, yeah.
1989 or 88, I can't remember. But in that time, it wasn't totally impractical. It wasn't like Kung Fu or Aikido. It was, jab, cross, hook, clinch, hip toss, punch them a couple of times, and stay on your feet. Is like the general unarmed Marine Corps basic hand-to-hand combat that we did back then. And so, not horrible. Stand, whirl to the left, whirl front, whirl right, right cross, grab, hip in, throw. Not horrible. It was just old school. It was like World War II cool shit.
Right.
Vietnam era hand-to-hand combat. It was mostly emphasized with your rifle and how you engage.
Hey.
You stroke, the butt stroke, horizontal, vertical, the uppercut stroke, and yeah.
I know you were a big lover of weapons back in the day. Did you really dig all the bayonet training you had to do as a Marine?
Yeah, and pugil sticks and the bridge over River Kwai, right, where you get out there on the bridge with your pugil sticks. And I remember I won 3 in a row, and I was all excited. And then some huge dude was standing across, and he probably played football, and I tried but to hit him, and it was like trying to stroke a train. He just ran me right off that bridge, and I was in the water.
That's great, man. Like it's interesting to me just to talk about even in the early days back in the 80s before people really understood the reality of what, real life confrontations was. Because if you look at most martial arts in those days, they were mostly striking arts. Everything was all kung fu, karate, taekwondo. That was the emphasis on most things. But the idea that in the military, they were still aware of the idea that that grappling was important. You talk about the hip throw and the aspects that come from that. Like the ability to put somebody in the ground is still the primary. It's in a very primitive nature, I'm sure that it was, but they still had the thoughts of that in their training.
I am definitely not an expert on the history of U.S. military hand-to-hand combat, but I'm fairly sure, and I know what guys are like Matt Larson, I believe, like really knows his history of military hand-to-hand combat. Alan Shabaro actually knows a lot about the history and evolution of U.S. military hand-to-hand combat, and others who actually know that history. But I do know that post-World War II, Japanese judo and the elements of it were kind of deemed that if you had to pick one art for military uniform, wearing gear, self-defense, it's the art of judo, because it's a cloth art, it's a grabbing art. You're not bound on the ground, but it has elements of the ground. And I kind of still think that if I had a pair of twins, identical, exact, untrained twins, and I could choose one martial art that they would be the best applicable for all ranges, and I only had a year, it would be judo. If I had 5 years, it would be the jiu-jitsu. But I think that the elements of judo are actually more applicable for a police academy, a quick hand-to-hand combat, a course, and all that, than to train a guy to be so comfortable on the ground that we will instinctively, out of panic, choose the ground. And that's the problem of the blue belt, purple belt, or even the sport IBJJF guy who then wants to make that MMA transition or into the street. Because the guard, the paradox is being on bottom sucks. My golden rules of hand-to-hand combat are: number one, be the guy on top. Number two, win on top, stay on top. Number three, win on bottom, have a guard, you shall not pass. Number four, never forget rule number one, easily forgotten due to the seductive and rewarding nature of guard.
Yeah, it's, Chris, we laugh about that, but it's something that I teach when I teach my jiu-jitsu classes the same way. Like I make no bones about it. I'm a sports guy, I compete. I do a lot of competitive jiu-jitsu. I enjoy it. Just it's part of what I do. And
Absolutely.
I could also make the debate that, being a sport jiu-jitsu guy is still a lot better than doing nothing. You know what I'm talking about? I understand sometimes there's the whole debate whether or not sport jiu-jitsu is diluting art. Man, I can see both sides of that, but I also say that some dude that competes on a big stage at the IBJJF and got a purple belt or above in jiu-jitsu is still going to be a whole lot better than a civilian, even if they don't really understand the ideas of self-defense.
Any civilian equivalent or kung fu or karate or any other thing, my money is on the sport guy, even if he pulls guard.
Right. But what I do always say is this, just like you said, I feel like a lot of times modern jiu-jitsu guys are, just like you said, lulled into the false sense of security of playing guard simply because it's a lazy man's game. When you start to get your brown belt or purple belt, it's so easy just to say, why am I going to work so hard for a takedown? I'm trying to pass this guy's guard. I'm just going to sit back and let him sit on my butt and set a trap for this guy to start to fall into me. Now that works.
We all do it. And that's
of course
the lazy, seductive, rewarding nature of the guard. But the guard is so much more fun to fuck a guy up when he thinks he's winning because he's on top, right?
Right.
And so that's the trap.
But the problem is just like you said, when you start to incorporate punches, when you start to incorporate strikes, the idea of saying now you're still 50-50 because we're in the guard. I always tell my guys, look, I don't even care. I'm a black belt, and I got a pretty damn good guard. If I'm in a self-defense situation, I'm still at 70-30 if I got a large athletic guy raining down hellfire on top of me.
You want to be on top.
Yeah, but you want to be on top 100%. I always make sure to tell people that.
I use all the time. When it's real, it's raining knuckles.
Right.
And you don't want to be staring up at the sky when it's raining knuckles. You want
And
to be
even-
looking down.
And even we take that into another aspect too. In my opinion, there's 3 stages of jiu-jitsu competition. There's the stage which is sport jiu-jitsu. We're in the gym and we're working on new things. There's MMA, which incorporates strikes, and then there's self-defense, which is a whole other aspect.
The
Because
whole
the
other
fight,
ball game.
yeah,
Yep.
the fight you're going to get into in an MMA match ain't the same fight you're going to get into in a life or death scenario where you're in self-defense, where the hellfire from punches is a real thing. Someone smacking your head into the ground, all the horrible things that could happen
Absolutely.
in a real fight.
And
Yeah.
I would even add, if you are a non-athlete or you're I'm going to use this and my wife will yell at me, misogynist, or if you're a woman whose goal is, I got to learn how to defend myself, then you better have a guard. But because you're usually surprised, sucker punched, whatever it is, you will end up on the ground. And if you have no ground game, you're done.
Right.
And the hardest guy or gal to bring on the ground is an experienced grappler who doesn't want to be on the ground. It's easier but to bring a boxer on the ground who isn't interested than it is a grappler on the ground who isn't interested. And we call that in the sport stalling.
And I'll even go ahead, Kev. Go ahead. Sorry.
It's brilliant in the street. You want to stall that fight as long as you can and escape.
Right. And I'll even along the lines of that train of thought too. This is something that I've always thought about when training fighters. The idea of, is it better to have a grappling background or a striking background to start with? You know what I mean? As the beginning point.
Yeah.
And it's I go back and forth and I debate on that quite a bit. But in my opinion, your athletic ability helps you way more in your attempts to not be taken down to the ground. So it's easier to take someone that's like, okay, cool, they're skilled as a striker, right? Very skilled boxer, very skilled Muay Thai guy. All right, now all I have to do is teach this guy how to not get taken down, and then maybe down the road we can build upon that. So if you start thinking about the idea of a street fight, well, I got to take some CrossFitter 220-pound monster onto the ground, and I weigh about 130 pounds. Even as a black belt, highly skilled wrestler, like, it's going to be difficult for me to athlete that guy on the ground.
I gotta stop you. Why? Like, I love that you just immediately went to CrossFit of all, like, power lifter, linebacker. You said CrossFit. Yeah, this guy just did so many box jumps, man. Oh boy.
Well, you know, Kev, there's a
Those
reason
guys
why.
are gnarly.
I'm not-
195-pound CrossFit obsessed ex-water polo guy is going to be a nightmare.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, in the hierarchy of, like, gym dudes that I would love not to mess with me, I'm going to the mountain, or like the Eddie Hall, like those big thick unit guys, like those guys.
I remember it was a few years back. I'm in Estonia and I'm instructing, and I meet a Russian Spetsnaz.
Oh, wow.
Super heavyweight, but judo champion. And the guy's wrists were thicker than my fists. The guy's neck, the guy's ears. Nice guy. Loved my class. Asked me, hey, would you want to train? And I got to tell you, I was scared. He was gentle and he was cool, but that dude, it was so strong and could lift a car that there is literally no way, if I engage with him in a stand-up grappling match, that I will not get absolutely controlled and thrown at his will, whether I land on my head or my side or my back. So
do you pull guard then?
I might pull guard. If I had no other choice, I'm going to pull guard. I've had heavyweight, open class matches with heavyweights, and I pulled guard I'm always glad when they pull guard. It's like, oh, thank God. But because I don't want to get thrown but by an expert in stand-up grappling who outweighs me by 3 classes.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because recently, one of the things that I always bring up when I talk about the hierarchy of positional jiu-jitsu and its ability to give your opponent less and less options to attack you. I use the John Danaher. I'm sure you know John Danaher. He put something out recently about 2 years ago that describes it pretty well. And I'm just curious if it's fluent with what you believe, because I know you come straight from the source of combat jiu-jitsu protection. So the idea is that you're always looking to take away your opponent's ability to use their legs. So if you're a strong guy, all your power from your base, all your power from throwing your strikes, all your power from being able to grab and grapple me, all come from being able to stand on your legs. So that's why you take the guy to the ground. Then when you get the guy on the ground, you have to get past his guard. Even if he doesn't know jiu-jitsu, he knows that on the ground, his legs are more powerful, so you have to get past that. Now you start building up to side mount, back, and all the other stuff. Is that congruent to your philosophical approaches on that same terminology?
Well, I'm going to say yes and no. And I'm going to say, generally speaking, yes. And so when you look at the human as an animal, which is how I look at us humans, we're primates who our lower limbs have evolved where our feet can no longer grab, whereas an ape or a monkey can still grab. So our legs, although when you watch monkeys or gorillas either play or have an actual battle, you will see the hands, the feet, and the legs, and the mouth. The hands are your accuracy. The legs are your mobility and your base and strength. So whether one is more valuable than the other, I'm not sure if I want to go into that pipeline. Another point, I'll just add this. So years back, when I had won my one and only pro Muay Thai fight, there was some guys from Thailand who wanted me to come over to Bangkok and fight. And I was lucky I had a really smart coach who said, no, you don't want to. Not only will they use you because it's a gambling sport, they'll hand you some chumps and then they'll throw you in the ring and you'll get killed. But you don't have the legs. And he explained how in old Muay Thai, the managers and trainers, they look at the young guy's legs. And if your ankles are thick and your calves are big, you could be a pro all the way. If you have skinny legs, little ankles, no calves, Muay Thai is probably not your art. Now, is that always true? No. There's exceptions to every rule. But in grappling, because our hands are I would say equally important, I think it changes that a bit. But having said that, I'm going to reverse that even again, because I think where it really lies is the hips. The key to athletics, whether I'm here, let me lean this up here a minute. Whether I'm throwing a ball, swinging a bat, throwing an opponent, it's not my arms, it's not just legs, it's where my hips are moving, right? And so everything is hips. Everything's hips. And your legs are what connect hips, right? If I'm here and I punch, it's fast, but when my hip is maneuvering, now my hands are elusive. My hands are my weapons. not blockers, not pars. My hips maneuver me. My legs are my strength, and my hands are my weapons. And so I want to be a hip-oriented athlete. Whether I'm swinging a bat, swinging a broadsword, pulling a bow, I don't want my arms. I want to feel my hips pulling the bow. I want to feel it in my hips and chest. So, yes and no. Are legs or hands more important? No. The hips are the most important. So it's hands, head, and hips. And the legs are a piece of the hip puzzle, which is the most important.
That's cool, man. I see that. Then again, when you start to think about actually controlling an opponent, I agree with you in that. Controlling someone's hips is winning the battle. Anytime I have control of your hip, now you can't move away. Anytime I have control of blocking the hip, you can't regard. Everything is about getting on those hips in the long run. Strike or taking someone down, you get the hips for hip tosses, get your hip underneath, and it's all about the hips. And then
I got a question.
Yeah.
But Kevin, if you can't control the hips, what do you want next? Head control or hand control?
Head control. I'd go with. I don't know. I'm confused. Hip. Right.
Right. Generally. But at the same time, you want to have an overall awareness at all times of the hands. Because it's the hands are what will kill you.
Right.
Whether it's weapons, eye gouge, or strike, the hands are the things that we can write with and draw with and do precise things to kill you with.
Yeah, that's interesting.
The hips is the base that maneuvers those hands, and the head controls the whole body too, right? You move the head, you move the body, which is all stuff you guys know and instruct all the time, I'm sure.
I think this would be a good, since this is such an educational episode for our listeners and our viewers, it would be a good time
to cut me off, right?
Chris, it's been a great time, man.
I want to make sure we get this because we already have a lot more to talk about. You are very famous for developing the term combat base. Now, I don't want to go into the story of how that happened, just because that's been told a million times. But I've read in interviews that you talk about how not just combat base, but a ton of really key terms for jiu-jitsu just didn't have any names when you were learning, and that you developed them as a way to help. What was it like learning jiu-jitsu? Just because I'm still a blue belt, and these terms are the guideposts that I'm able to build my game off of. Like, I see something and I know what it's called, and I can know it. What was it like learning without names? You know, like take me through like what classes were like.
Well, for one thing, I'm going to say that it wasn't that there weren't any names. It was that most of us couldn't remember the names that we learned in Portuguese, right?
Okay.
And I'm going to give Eddie Bravo his props because clearly he has branded moves with names that you can't not remember, right?
Right.
Whereas if you heard something like, oh, that move is a shove de brazo with the bassa. I mean, I can't remember that, right? And obviously I don't speak Portuguese, but I can remember wing arm bar, key lock arm bar, shoulder arm bar. But if I want to brand that, I'm going to call it indica arm bar, stretch and reach, crotch bar, and add something in there. So, but terminology is one of those things that is a necessary tool to communicate arts of the body, but it's necessary to not get stuck in arguing over what something is called, which I have done. And I will give you an example. Sidemount. What they call Sidemount in MMA, and now even a lot of Brazilian instructors, is what we call cross sides. What I call. Because side mount is when you're mounted your opponent and your opponent turns to his side and you're now mounting their side. So there's front mount, he turns, side mount, he turns all the way around exposing his back mount. So your legs have to be around your opponent in order to have a mount. So a side mount, your legs are around your opponent and he is on his side. Cross sides, your legs are no longer around your opponent. Whether you have 90-degree cross sides or north-south. So that's just my opinion. But all it is terminology, right? Who cares? Who cares what we call it?
It's funny. It's funny you say those things because, like, as I've progressed to training jiu-jitsu, I've been training for 12 years or so now. You see things sometimes that guys, you go to different gyms and they have different names for different things, and they'll be like, "Hey, can you show me this whatever cross mount elevator sweep armbar?" And it's like, maybe, I'm not really sure what that means. But then you look at it, you're like, "Oh, okay, no, that we called it something else at my gym." Like the vocabulary and the vernacular, it's not like there's a set terminology. And that's one of the things about jiu-jitsu that always intrigues me is that, jiu-jitsu in and of itself, I'm a black belt. The way I teach jiu-jitsu is going to be different than the way you teach jiu-jitsu. But at the end of the day, we're both teaching jiu-jitsu. Like, my black belt isn't any less, viable than your black belt, even though we have different approaches and different philosophies and different techniques that we might emphasize on. It's just, it evolves on its own. I've always had a kick out of that.
Okay, well, here's an interesting question. And I'm a philosophy nerd. So you have guys who think that the jiu-jitsu should somehow be more regulated, right? It's like, oh, it's terrible that Joe Blow's school over there is now handing out guys the belts and stuff. And we can make an argument that that's horrible. We can make an argument that IBJ, the JF, keeps adding rules and watering down the art, right? Or we can make an argument that we need some kind of coherent structure and rules, and the art must be preserved and protected. So, in my opinion, all of these arguments, although they're fun to engage in, this is where, as altruistic as I can be and as gracious as an instructor as I am, does it really matter if somebody is showing bad jiu-jitsu, or what we would call bad, or they're handing out candy belts, or they're making a bunch of overly ruled competitions that are now turning it into a sport like Taekwondo? Does that really matter is the question. And what the answer is, what matters to you? What are your goals in this thing? And I totally understand how the guy who's teaching fake martial arts for self-defense to women and kids could put them in a worse spot now, because now they're learning stuff that's impractical. But what I don't really understand is why it becomes such a personal resentment for so many guys in our reality martial arts community that somehow we must preserve this purity of something that we're watching evolve over time. Where is purity?
Yeah, that's interesting you bring that up, man, because, I think about those things a lot. And there was a time when I was like, oh, this is fake. This guy's jiu-jitsu, their jiu-jitsu sucks. You don't even really train there. But I always go back to this, man. Like, as long as you're rolling live, you're doing jiu-jitsu. As long as you're rolling live, you're learning how to deal with the pressures and the stressors of what a real life altercation are going to be like. Therefore, you are benefiting from jiu-jitsu, and you can grow based upon that. And sometimes guys get belted up a little bit quicker than they should. Sometimes guys they take forever to get their belts. All of those things don't really mean anything. It's all about the journey of the process.
It's the whole journey. And my line I use all the time, it's not who's good. It's not if you won or lost last week or last month or last year. What matters is who's left. We measure this in years, not months. And where are you going to be in 5 years is your goal. Not next week, I'm going to learn this version of the armbar so I can. Those micro goals, I think, pull you away from the big picture. What is the big picture? Is where do you want to be when you grow up in this art? These guys are all going.
All right. We'll see you guys. Stay safe.
Going big.
Wear your masks.
Wearing their masks. Oh, they got tricked into the hoax. In the hoax that the whole world is in on.
Right.
Every media company is in on the hoax.
Everybody's in on it. Well, let's continue down that road a little bit, because that's in particular something that I think about in you, and one of the reasons why I really think of you as someone that I respect greatly. You are known as an iconic, almost monk of the sport. Like, people talk about how you still have your gym in the garage. You know what I mean? You get.
That's because I'm in LA and. Okay, but anyways, go ahead.
But the point, it's a very complimentary line of thought I'm coming to here. And there's something about you that makes me believe that you are still in jiu-jitsu for the purity of the art. We talk about now, and one of the things you said earlier, you were lucky enough to get into the sport before the UFC, so you understand these things. You see so many people that want to be MMA fighters. Now you see so many people that are so intent on being the next Gordon Ryan or the next professional jiu-jitsu phenom, and all these the light of modern jiu-jitsu. But what I think of you when I think of you, I think of someone that truly cares about what the process is from going from white belt to black belt, and how it changes your students. Talk a little bit about that.
I do. And it's kind of like a few years back, remember the meme was running around, but jiu-jitsu changed my life. And I would think about that and I'd say absolutely. But jiu-jitsu has changed my life completely 100%. And I even added, but jiu-jitsu destroyed my career and ruined my relationships with normal people. I'm kidding.
That tracks. That really does.
But and that's because, as Hickson has told me, which of course warmed my heart when I got Hickson approval, was, Kreese, you are a warrior. And a warrior is different than a sport athlete, like a boxer, a wrestler. You are a warrior, a martial artist. And art is the part. And how I instruct is street, art, and sport, right? That's my Chris Haueter patented triangle. You think street, because that's what keeps the game honest, is why did you originally walk in the room? You wanted to learn how to preserve your life in a real fight. So we think street. We train the sport. Why? Because it's practical and it's fun. We have to create some sort of man-made rules so we're not eye gouging and knocking each other out and killing each other. We have to be able to play the game of the fight as close as we can without massive injury and trauma. So, and you practice the art, and the art is exploration. Let's see where this thing can go. Let's explore just the leg game. Let's explore just the initial clinch grip, right? That's the art. So it's you think street. You don't train street. You think it all the time. You train the sport because you need to train your body because your body is the vehicle of your art. And you can't be an out of shape shitbird and bury the art. It's impossible. And the art is the part that grows until you're in a wheelchair or in a cane. You could still grow aspects of the art. And that is how, in my opinion, it's those three things that change you over time to where you look back and see you're a completely different person. I've heard this a lot. I'm going to add one point. Is why are there so many assholes and jerks in jiu-jitsu and MMA? My answer is imagine them if they didn't have it. How much worse of assholes they would be.
That's a good
Probably
point.
worse. So martial arts, real arts are power. We are gaining the powers of heroes. Not superheroes because it's not magic. That's what we came in for, superpowers. And we found that we can gain human powers. And with these human powers, we can either choose to be a jerk or a hero. And there's so many guys, and I see this all over the internet, and it drives me nuts, who online on the keyboard, they act like they're such heroes who would stand in the line and protect the children or whatever it is. Where were you 5 fucking years ago? Why is it now? It's because they're not really being heroes. They're trying to get other people to think they're being heroes, is my opinion. And I will just use, because it's a current meme out there, hashtag save the children. Who the fuck doesn't want to save kids? Who the fuck? I mean, how many out there are truly sickos? Not a lot. And back in 2006, under George W. Bush, began a program to go get missing children. Under Obama, it was amplified. And under Trump, it continues. So no one is responsible for this new phenomenon that we're going to go out and save kids. It is just suddenly in mainstream news. Just like it was in 2006 when the Epstein story was broken by mainstream liberal journalists. And as soon as it gets picked up in mainstream, suddenly we act like, where was the news? The news was fucking there. You just weren't reading real news. You were scrolling through Facebook.
Okay. You go, Kev.
That's my.
No, I get it. I understand. I will preface this. I understand the line of conclusion that you're drawing. I understand the connection you're trying to make. I just don't want to lose viewers. I don't feel like having a political debate.
I will just add this. Some of my best friends have the opposite political ideology as I do, and we are friends.
Right.
But we're not going to engage in an argument online in chat boxes.
Right. I understand where you're going with that. Like I agree with you too a lot about that, to tell you the truth. All of a sudden everyone's you know, and people don't do things because they feel like it's right. They do things because they want to appear like they care, in the same way that jiu-jitsu and MMA, the guys jump on this whole I'm a tough guy thing.
And
I think
everyone
that
does it. Liberals, conservatives.
It's human nature.
It's called virtue signaling. Look how virtuous I am.
Right.
I think that one of the best parts about jiu-jitsu is, you feel like there's a lot of jerks in it, but there's also the potential that it's so tough that it strips away that veneer of arrogance. And the people that stick around on the whole tend to be a little bit more well-adjusted, a little bit more in touch with the reality of, okay, I can be thrown, I can be submitted. Maybe I shouldn't be an asshole all the time, and that's something that I've gotten out of it. And I, as much jiu-jitsu as we have to talk about, I wanted to briefly talk about some of your work as an artist, in addition to your time as a black belt. In fact, you were recently published in the book I'm holding in my hand, Public Domain, art magazine by the folks at Artitude, featuring
That's pretty cool, huh?
It is so cool. And I'm just gonna flip to your section real quick, because this might be one of the coolest photographs I've ever seen. Like, look at that. Look at that cool guy right there.
Yeah.
I
made
myself look cool, right?
That is a movie poster waiting to happen.
As I possibly could.
I love the business card that just says jiu-jitsu on it too. How long have you been drawing for?
Well, as a kid, I was always one of those artist kids. And sometime before I don't know how old I was, 19 or 20, I realized that art was impractical. I was in art brain all the time, thinking about art. I put art on hold, thinking I would pick it up within a year or two. And 15 years passed, and I didn't do any art for a long time. And to make another long story longer, basically,
that's going to be the title of this episode, by the way.
Long story
longer by Chris Hauer.
15 or so years ago, actually 20 or so years ago, I was off the radar for a while in a deep, dark black hole of life. And rediscovering art and relearning martial arts was what pulled me out of the black hole. Among other stuff, right, that I don't discuss. But those, and I got fully back in to art but discovered computer art and fell in love and enrolled in a class before I even had an email account, and I don't even still know how to use a keyboard, but I made up my mind that I'm gonna not be a Luddite. I'm gonna lean forward into the future, and I'm gonna learn this new form of art. And because as a kid, I always wanted to be an animator, do comic books and all that stuff. And I found that when I put art on hold in my life, I replaced it with martial arts, exercise, military stuff. I was a cop, but briefly. And it was all that stuff that is really the other side of the yin and yang in art. There's the soft side and the hard side, right? And I needed to rekindle art again because in my opinion, art kind of is the point. When we ask ourselves whether we're for or against more taxes, for or against a war, for or against this, ultimately, what we are people who want to be entertained. And what entertains us is art, music, film, drawing, painting. This is why we are fighting for civilization. And the human being, where we are, our mind, whether you're the individual, the tribe, the group, or the culture, we are vehicles of stories and narrative.
All right. Hey, everybody. Kevin here. We had a few back-to-back technical difficulties. My green screen is starting to go for some reason back there. Both Chris and Kev had to bounce. They both had stuff to do, and we got a little bit of a late start. We will be sure to have Chris back at his earliest convenience. It was great talking to him. We had a ton more stuff to go over. We're really sorry for how this ended. It was really going in some interesting places there, but we are slaves to scheduling and whether or not our technology wants to work with us or just fight us at every turn, like it always does. I'm looking at you, Logitech face cam. Once again, we will have him back soon, and we can't wait to meet you guys for the next episode. Thank you so much for your patience. Really sorry that such a great episode had to end this way, but as always, stay safe, stay healthy, remember to love each other, and we'll see you next time. Good night.